I sat there, frozen, staring at the empty doorway where my wife had just stood. The gentle hum of my computer felt like thunder in my ears. 7 years of marriage and she'd just announced she was going on a date, like she was telling me she'd picked up groceries. Callum! Of course it was Callum! I'd seen him at company events, always surrounded by people, always the center of attention. The way he looked at Lyra during the last Christmas party should have been my first warning. But I'd trusted her. Trusted us. My hands gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white. The framed photo of our wedding day stared back at me. Lyra in her flowing white dress, her smile radiant, genuine. My throat tightened. That smile felt like it belonged to a different person now. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through our recent texts. Everything seemed normal. Discussions about dinner plans, silly memes she'd sent, heart emojis. How long had she been planning this? How many times had she texted him while lying next to me in bed? The sound of her car starting in the driveway snapped me back to reality. My legs carried me to the window without thinking. Through the gathering dusk, I watched her red brake lights disappear down our street. She hadn't even changed out of her work clothes, that new black dress she'd bought last month. Had she bought it for him? The house felt massive and empty. Every corner held a memory that now felt tainted. The kitchen where we'd slow danced at midnight, the couch where we'd watched our favorite shows, the walls we'd painted together, arguing about color swatches and getting more paint on ourselves than the walls. My phone buzzed. For a split second, hope surged through me. Maybe she'd turned around. Maybe this was all some sick joke. But it was just a work email. Work seemed absurdly trivial now. My wife was on a date with another man, and I was standing alone in our home, feeling like an intruder in my own life. My hands trembled as I poured another finger of bourbon, the bottle clinking against the glass. The living room clock's steady rhythm mocked me. Each tick, another moment my wife spent with him. Another moment of my life, crumbling. I grabbed my phone, scrolling to Miles's contact. He'd always been my voice of reason since college. The screen blurred as I hit dial. "Hey man, what's up?" Miles's familiar voice came through. "Got a hypothetical for you. What would you do if a friend's wife just went on a date with another man?" Miles let out an uncomfortable laugh. "Ha! Ha ha! Shit, that's heavy. Guy's either married to a psycho or missing some major red flags." The bourbon burned my throat as I took another sip. Yeah, red flags. This friend of yours? He talked to her about it? I stared at Lyra's empty spot on the couch. She didn't exactly give him a choice. The front door clicked open before Miles could respond. Lyra breezed in, her hair slightly disheveled, lipstick smeared at the corner of her mouth. My stomach lurched. "It was fun," she smiled, shrugging off her coat. "Just what I needed." "Fun?" The word felt like glass in my throat. She kicked off her heels, completely casual, like she hadn't just shattered our marriage. "Callum and I are thinking about taking a weekend trip. Nothing serious." The room spun. The bourbon glass nearly slipped from my grip. "Weekend trip. Nothing serious." The words echoed in my head like a sick joke. Lyra headed upstairs, leaving me alone in the dark living room. The clock kept ticking. My phone buzzed, Miles probably wondering why I'd hung up. I couldn't bring myself to answer. The morning light filtered through our bedroom window as I sat on the edge of the bed, watching Lyra pack her weekend bag. Each item she tossed in felt like another punch to my gut. The familiar floral dress she wore on our 3rd anniversary, the perfume I gave her last Christmas. Her cheerful humming pierced through the silence, each note driving my blood pressure higher. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the bedpost, restraining the urge to knock that damn suitcase off the bed. You're being unusually quiet, Lyra said, folding another blouse with practiced precision. I didn't respond. What was there to say? My wife was packing for a romantic getaway with another man while I sat here like a fool. The zipper of her suitcase echoed through the room with crushing finality. She turned to me with that same carefree smile she'd worn since dropping her bombshell yesterday. I think this will be good for both of us. Some space to figure things out. The casual way she justified her betrayal made my jaw clench. 7 years of marriage reduced to figuring things out? A car horn broke through my thoughts. I moved to the window, watching Callum's black BMW idling in our driveway. The sight of him lounging against the hood, checking his watch, made my stomach turn. Lyra grabbed her suitcase and bounced down the stairs. I followed mechanically, watching her throw open our front door. She turned back, waving as if she was heading off to a normal business trip. The door clicked shut. Through the window, I watched her walk away from our marriage, rolling her designer luggage toward her new adventure. Callum took her bag, their hands lingering together longer than necessary. The garage door hadn't finished closing before I had my phone out. Yes, I need a locksmith, emergency service, this morning. My voice was steady, despite the trembling in my hands. I want every lock in the house changed. Every single one. After hanging up, I grabbed garbage bags from under the kitchen sink. Started in our bedroom, her bedroom. 7 years of accumulated belongings sorted into black plastic. Designer clothes, makeup, jewelry, photos. Everything that marked her presence in my life went into those bags. Each item I touched fueled my resolve. The shared memories they held no longer brought comfort, only clarity. By the time I dragged the last bag to the garage, sweat dripped down my back despite the morning chill. But the house was mine again. Empty, but clean, like lancing an infected wound. The locksmith arrived an hour later. I watched him work, the metallic scraping of new keys drowning out the echo of Lyra's humming that still haunted these walls. My hands stopped shaking as I sat down at my desk, a new sense of purpose replacing the blind rage. The laptop screen illuminated my face as I logged into our joint bank account. 7 years of shared finances spread out before me in cold, hard numbers. I pulled up the statements from the past 6 months, downloading them into a spreadsheet. Strange charges started jumping out. Expensive restaurants I'd never been to, hotel bookings I'd never been to, small businesses I knew nothing about. A pattern emerged in the dates. Always on those nights Lyra claimed to be working late or having drinks with colleagues. The phone records were next. Our family plan made it easy to access her call history. Callum's number appeared with increasing frequency over the past few months. 5-minute calls stretched into hour-long conversations, always during her lunch breaks or on her drive home. Times when she told me she was stuck in traffic or in meetings. Our shared cloud storage held another treasure trove of deception. Photos she'd forgotten to delete, intimate dinners, stolen moments in hotel lobbies, secret meetups in parks. Each image drove another nail into the coffin of our marriage. The email account we'd set up for household bills became the smoking gun. She'd been careless, leaving a trail of correspondence with Callum. Flirtatious messages disguised as work discussions, restaurant reservations, hotel confirmations, flight bookings for weekend getaways that had nothing to do with business trips. I created a detailed spreadsheet, mapping out every lie, column after column, filled with dates, times, locations, and explanations she'd given me versus the truth revealed in these digital breadcrumbs. The timeline stretched back further than I'd imagined, nearly 8 months of calculated deception. Each entry got its own folder of evidence, screenshots, receipts, photos, email threads. I cross-referenced everything against my own calendar, highlighting the nights she'd claimed to be somewhere else. The pattern was undeniable. The betrayal methodical. The precision of my documentation felt therapeutic, transforming my emotional wounds into concrete data points. This wasn't just a record of her infidelity. It was ammunition, carefully catalogued and irrefutable. Every lie she'd told me sat neatly organized in rows and columns, ready to be deployed when the time came. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke through the silence of my home. I'd been waiting for this moment, sitting in my study with the lights off. Through the window, I watched Lyra step out of her car, carrying her weekend bag like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just spent 2 days with another man. She walked up to the door with that familiar bounce in her step. The key scratched against the lock once, twice, then more forcefully. I heard a frustrated grunt, followed by more aggressive attempts. The pounding started. "Garrison, are you home? My key's not working." I let the knocking continue, each desperate thud echoing through the house. My hands clenched the folder in my lap, 8 months of lies laid bare in neat, organized pages. "Garrison, this isn't funny. Let me in." I took my time walking to the door, savoring each panicked knock. When I finally opened it, Lyra stumbled forward, caught mid-knock. I didn't step aside to let her in. Instead, I dropped the folder at her feet. Papers spilled out, bank statements, screenshots, hotel receipts. And imagine what life would have been like if she hadn't been telling tales when she first grabbed the first page. Her face drained of color as she picked up the first page. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through them, taking in the highlighted dates, the careful notes, the damning evidence. "Garrison, I can explain." A harsh laugh escaped my throat. "Explain what? That you got bored and destroyed our life?" I gestured toward the garage. "Your things are in there. Get them and leave." She stood frozen, clutching the papers. "Please, just let me—" "Get your things and leave." I shut the door in her face. Through the window, I watched her stumble to her car, collapse into the driver's seat. The folder lay scattered across my front steps. For an hour, she just sat there. My phone buzzed constantly with her calls. I switched it to silent and watched as she wiped tears from her face, tried calling again and again. Eventually, she got out and gathered the fallen papers, tucking them back into the folder with shaking hands. The texts started that night. The voicemails piled up. Each morning, fresh flowers appeared on my doorstep. I threw them in the trash without reading the cards. A week later, she ambushed me at work. I was heading to lunch when she stepped out from behind a pillar in the parking garage. "Garrison, please, just talk to me." I walked past her to my car. Oh, I made a mistake, I know that now. I unlocked the door. "Say something. Anything." I turned to face her, my voice flat. "You wanted excitement? Now you have it." I got in my car and drove away, leaving her standing alone in the parking garage. Her reflection grew smaller in my rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. I sat in my home office, staring at the carefully organized evidence folder on my screen. 8 months of lies, deceit, and betrayal, all meticulously documented. My finger hovered over the send button. Part of me wanted to just delete everything and disappear, but I couldn't let Lyra control the narrative. I hit send. The email went out to our entire social circle. Friends, family, co-workers. The subject line was simple: the truth about Lyra. Attached was a PDF containing bank statements, hotel receipts, text messages, photos, everything that proved her affair with Callum. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. The first call came from Lyra's mother, Sandra. I almost didn't answer, but I owed her that much. Sandra's voice cracked through the speaker. "Garrison, I just read everything." She broke down sobbing. "How could she do this to you, to us? We raised her better than this." I stayed silent, letting her process it. There was nothing I could say to ease her pain. "We're so ashamed," she continued. "All those family dinners, holidays, while she was with that man." Her voice turned bitter on those last words. The next call was from Robert, Lyra's father. His usual warm tone was replaced with cold fury, but not directed at me. "Son, I want you to know we're behind you 100%. I just left Lyra a message. She's not welcome in our home until she fixes herself. This isn't how we raised her." Messages flooded in from friends, expressing their shock and support. Some shared additional details I hadn't known about, times they'd seen Lyra and Callum together, but hadn't thought anything of it. Each new revelation twisted the knife deeper. My sister Sam called next. "You okay, big brother?" "I am now," I replied, surprised to find I meant it. The truth needed to come out. Later that evening, Miles came over with takeout and beer. We sat in comfortable silence until my phone buzzed with a text from a mutual friend. Lyra just left the restaurant crying. Everyone was staring at her. Miles raised his bottle. To consequences. I clinked my beer against his, feeling no satisfaction in Lyra's public humiliation, just a quiet sense of justice being served. The truth was finally out there, and she could no longer hide behind her lies. The past few weeks have been a blur of anger and pain, but something inside me finally snapped. I couldn't keep living in this pit of despair. One morning, I dug out my old gym membership card from the drawer and decided it was time for a change. The gym became my sanctuary. Every rep, every drop of sweat felt like releasing another piece of Lyra from my system. The physical exhaustion helped quiet my mind, and seeing my body transform gave me something positive to focus on. The routine became almost meditative. Wake up, work, gym, repeat. In my garage, I found my grandfather's old woodworking tools, gathering dust. I remembered the peaceful hours we'd spent together when I was younger, learning to shape raw lumber into something beautiful. The first project was rough, a simple bookshelf that took twice as long as it should have. But feeling the wood grain under my fingers and focusing on precise measurements helped ground me in the present. Miles kept checking in, making sure I wasn't isolating myself completely. When he suggested a weekend hike at Redwood Trail, I agreed. The fresh air and physical challenge would do me good. We were taking a break at the summit overlook when I heard laughter floating up from around the bend. Not the shrill, attention-seeking kind I'd grown used to with Lyra, but something warm and genuine that made me turn my head. She came into view wearing hiking boots and carrying a professional-looking camera. Chestnut hair in a loose braid, bright green eyes alive with enthusiasm as she photographed something in the distance. When she noticed us, she gave a friendly wave. "Mind if I grab a shot of this view? The light is perfect right now." Miles, being Miles, immediately struck up a conversation. Her name was Emery, and she was documenting local wildlife patterns for an environmental study. The way she spoke about her work radiated authentic passion, not the carefully curated image Lyra always tried to project. We ended up hiking the rest of the trail together. Emery pointed out things I'd never noticed before, subtle signs of animal activity, rare plants tucked away in crevices. She had this calming presence that made conversation feel effortless. When we reached the trailhead, Miles made a show of checking his phone and claiming he had a last-minute assignment to shoot. Subtle as a brick, that one. But as I watched Emery pack up her gear, I found myself not wanting the day to end. "There's a coffee shop around the corner if you'd like to warm up," I offered, surprised by my own boldness. Her smile was genuine, reaching all the way to those remarkable eyes. "I'd like that." Over coffee, we talked about everything and nothing. She told me about growing up in a small town, her love for the outdoors, the satisfaction of contributing to environmental conservation. I found myself opening up about my woodworking projects. No pretense, no games, just real conversation. For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me. Not the electric spark of infatuation I'd felt with Lyra, but something steadier, more authentic. While part of me wanted to guard against any possibility of being hurt again, Emery's genuine warmth made those walls feel a little less necessary. I didn't expect to run into Lyra at the grocery store. She looked different. Worn down, haunted. The confident spark in her eyes had dimmed. She stood in the produce section, absently picking through tomatoes, while Marin lectured her about something. I quickly ducked into another aisle, but not before catching snippets of their conversation. "You can't keep wallowing like this," Marin's sharp voice carried. "You made your choices." I grabbed what I needed and made my way to checkout, keeping my distance. Through the store windows, I watched them load groceries into Marin's car. Lyra's designer clothes had been replaced by baggy sweats, her usually perfect hair pulled back messily. Part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction seeing her brought low, but mostly, I felt nothing. That evening, Emery and I met for dinner at a small Thai place downtown. She was telling me about her latest environmental research project, her eyes lighting up as she described tracking migration patterns. I found myself completely absorbed in her enthusiasm, the earlier encounter with Lyra fading away. "Want to try this weekend hike I mapped out?" Emery asked, pulling up some trail photos on her phone. "The wildflowers should be amazing right now." "I'd love to." I realized I meant it. Being with Emery felt natural, uncomplicated. She didn't play games or demand constant excitement. We could sit in comfortable silence or talk for hours. Later that week, I ran into Sam, who'd apparently had lunch with Marin. She told me Lyra had started therapy and was facing some hard truths about herself. I nodded, but didn't press for details. My life had moved in a different direction. Emery and I spent Saturday morning hiking the trails she'd found. The spring air was crisp and clear, wildflowers dotting the mountainside in brilliant patches of purple and yellow. We stopped to rest on some rocks overlooking the valley. "This is perfect," I said, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. Emery smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. We sat there quietly, taking in the view. No pressure to fill the silence, no need to be anything other than ourselves. For the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. The sun was warm on my face, Emery's hand still in mine. Whatever came next, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. Sometime later, when Lyra's letter arrived, I barely gave it a glance before tossing it onto the kitchen counter. The crisp cream envelope, embossed with her familiar flourish of handwriting, felt both foreign and too familiar. For a moment, I considered leaving it sealed, burying whatever fragile olive branch it contained under unopened utility bills or grocery receipts. But curiosity, or maybe the faint pulse of lingering resentment, gnawed at the edges of my resolve. I ripped it open right there, standing in the fading light of the kitchen, the half-finished cabinet I'd been working on mocking me from its corner in the workshop. The letter was as expected. Flowery apologies dressed in self-awareness, her words swimming with admissions of guilt and wishes for understanding. She painted herself in the hues of regret, all deep shadows and muted tones. She said all the things an apologetic person should, and then some. How she had been reckless. How she had taken what we had for granted. How meeting Callum had been a wake-up call to the parts of herself she'd neglected, but that she now understood all it had cost her. The kicker, she closed it with, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll believe I've changed." I stood there for a while after, unsure if I felt anger or relief. I read it again, slower this time, letting the calculated syllables roll over me like static. But the thing is, as I reached the end and folded the paper neatly for no reason at all, I realized that wasn't anything left inside me for her. No flicker of lost affection, no deep wound she'd just salted, just an emptiness that mirrored the echo of footsteps in a vacated home. Without a word, I opened a drawer, pulled out the binder where I'd neatly organized every significant piece of documentation from the disaster that was our divorce. Bank statements, lawyer correspondences, every shred of her wrongdoings, and slipped the letter into the back. It felt clinical, almost bureaucratic to file it away like that. But that's where it belonged. I didn't think about it much after. Her letter didn't hold power. It didn't unravel me or stir any complex, lingering pain. It was just there, folded quietly into a corner of my life I'd long since decided to stop revisiting. A year later to the day, I found myself in a very different place, both literally and metaphorically. Emery and I had driven up into the hills to catch the sunset. She'd texted earlier in the day, suggesting we pack some food for a picnic on a whim, her spontaneity becoming one of the things I quietly cherished most about her. The two of us sat on a weathered blanket in the soft grass, overlooking the city. The sky painted the horizon in warm pink-gold light, diffused by the cooling spring air, and Emery's laughter as she teased me about my lopsided sandwiches melted into the hum of distant city life below. I leaned back on my elbows, watching the way her face lit up when she gestured mid-conversation, hands racing to keep pace with her thoughts. Our conversations always moved like that, easy yet alive. Somehow, discussions about which star might appear first blurred seamlessly into debates about why squirrels were just chaos in fur form. It wasn't perfection, it was unfiltered, and it worked. The question she asked caught me off guard, though not in a way that pricked or stung, it just lingered, hanging softly in the air around us. "Do you ever regret how it all turned out?" I paused, not because I needed to think about it, but because it felt like a moment worth respecting with silence. The last year rewound quickly in my mind, the late nights in the gym burning out my anger, the aching satisfaction of chiseling dovetails into place on a project, Miles showing up unprompted with cheap beer, and endless determination to drag me out of my slump. Then there was Emery. Not so much as a moment, but a steady presence that had grown quietly and honestly. I could see the way her braid fell across one shoulder as she tilted her head, looking at me with that curious sincerity she always carried. I could feel the weight of her companionship, not as something I needed, but as something I wanted. That distinction mattered. A lot. "Not anymore." That was my answer, but it felt more like a truth I'd finally accepted, rather than something I just told her in the moment. Emery didn't respond with words, just a knowing look and a faint smile that said more than enough. She understood things without pressing. That was another thing about her. She didn't need to solve or dig. We both turned our attention back to the skyline, letting the last rays of sunlight fade into a gradient of blue and violet. I'd spent too much time looking over my shoulder into the past, ruminating about the what-ifs that defined my crumbled decade. Plus with Lyra. But out there on that hill with Emery, the weight of it all, the anger, the betrayal, the need for closure, felt so far behind me it was barely a shadow at my feet. I didn't even realize I'd stopped checking for it. Meanwhile, Lyra moved through her days in the background of my awareness, a faint flicker of a life I used to know. Every so often, I'd catch glimpses of her online, if a mutual acquaintance tagged her in something, a blurry shot of her at a wine bar here, a yoga class there. It was clear she'd shifted focus inward. Therapy posts and self-help quotes punctuated her digital presence. She wasn't the same Lyra who'd shouted over me in our kitchen about how things just happened. Still, knowing that didn't make me ache for her or wish her ill. She could keep her self-discovery and her quiet loneliness. I'd taken enough time carrying the wreckage of someone else's choices. Whatever weight remained on her shoulders wasn't mine to share, let alone lighten. Whatever light I had now was my own, and I wasn't turning back. As the stars began to flicker faintly above the city, I felt Emery quietly thread her hand through mine. The gesture was simple, gentle, like everything about her that understood when not to fill space with words. We didn't need to say it aloud, but the unspoken truth was there, written against the twinkling backdrop of a universe much larger than either of us. We were here, now, and that mattered more than whatever I'd left behind. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.